The air in the gala didn't just go quiet. It turned to ice. Alfie North, the patriarch of a multi-billion-dollar real estate empire, had just signed a contract that would unknowingly hand his legacy to a corporate shark. He thought the quiet waitress trembling beside him was invisible, a ghost in a stained apron. He was catastrophically wrong. Instead of walking away, Caitlin lifted her gaze, her green eyes piercing through a decade of exhaustion. She didn't beg. She corrected him. Not in English, but in an archaic Sicilian dialect found only in the most ancient heritage deeds, a dialect that proved the contract was a fraudulent trap. The room went deadly still. Logan North, the predatory CEO with eyes like flint, froze as he realized this wasn't just a waitress. She was the heir to the Valente fortune, a woman whose family legacy had been stolen by the very man trying to scam them. The invisible girl just became the most powerful person in the room. Caitlin's world was measured in the rhythmic, soul-crushing ticking of the industrial clock in the kitchen of the Gilded. Rose, 5 p.m., 7 p.m., midnight, at 24. Her body felt like a rusted machine fueled by cheap caffeine and the desperate need to remain unnoticed. She adjusted the collar of her cheap polyester uniform, feeling the familiar itch of the fabric against skin that once knew only the finest silks. For 10 years, she had perfected the art of the waitress slump, shoulders hunched, eyes down, voice a mere whisper. To the world, she was Caitlin Lloyd, a high school dropout with no past. In reality, she was the last of the Valentes, the daughter of a brilliant innovator whose life and patents were swallowed whole by Dante Russo, a man who didn't use bullets to kill, but legal loopholes and predatory bouts. Tonight was different. The atmosphere in the restaurant felt heavy, charged with the kind of electricity that precedes a lightning strike. Table 4, Caitlin. Move it, the manager hissed, snapping his fingers. The Norths don't like to be kept waiting. One mistake, and you're back on the streets. Do you understand? Caitlin nodded, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the silver tray. Alfie and Logan North. The names were legendary in New York, men of iron and skyscraper glass. As she approached the private alcove, she saw them. Alfie, the silver-haired lion, and Logan, his son, a man whose presence seemed to bend the light around him. They were deep in discussion with a man she recognized instantly, Dante Russo. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. Russo looked older, more arrogant, his hand resting on a thick, leather-bound document that looked centuries old. It's a simple heritage transfer, Alfie, Russo purred, his voice like oil. A formality to merge the Valenti patents into your tech wing. The Sicilian dialect in the original deed is tricky, but my translators have verified it. Sign here, and the North Russo merger is complete. Caitlin stood there, pouring the sparkling water with practiced, trembling precision. She wasn't supposed to listen. She wasn't supposed to care. But as her eyes flickered toward the document, she saw a word, a specific, archaic Sicilian legal term, pseudomanu. Russo's translator had marked it as full transfer. Her breath hitched. In the dialect of her grandfather, in the secret language of the Valenti estate, pseudomanu didn't mean transfer. It meant underhand, a conditional clause that triggered a total forfeiture of assets to the signatories. Rival if a specific debt wasn't paid in 48 hours. Russo wasn't merging with the Norths. He was setting a trap to bankrupt them and seize their entire tech portfolio. The silence of a decade broke inside her. It wasn't logic that moved her. It was the raw, stinging memory of her father's face as he watched his life's work vanish. The translation is wrong, she said. The voice didn't sound like hers. It was clear, melodic, and carried the weight of a queen. Alfie North stopped mid-signature. Logan's dark, sharp eyes snapped up, locking onto hers with a terrifying intensity. "What did you say, girl?" Alfie asked, his voice a low rumble of disbelief. Russo's face paled, then turned a mottled red. "Ignore her. She's a servant. Probably had too much of the kitchen's wine." Caitlin didn't look at Russo. She looked directly at Logan. Section 4, paragraph 2. You're reading it as a dialect of modern Italian. But this is the arborescu influence of the Sicilian highlands. Pseudomanu isn't an authorization. It's a poison pill. If you sign that, Mr. North, you aren't buying a legacy. You're signing your own eviction notice. The silence that followed was deafening. Logan didn't look at the contract. He stared at Caitlin as if he were seeing a ghost manifest in the middle of a crowded room. He saw the way she stood, not like a waitress, but like a woman who had once owned the ground she walked on. "Who are you?" Logan asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous, curious whisper. "Just someone who knows how it feels to lose everything to a lie," she replied, her voice trembling now as the adrenaline began to fade. She turned and walked away, her legs feeling like lead, leaving the three most powerful men in the city in a state of absolute shock. She didn't wait for her shift to end. She grabbed her coat, ignoring the manager's screams, and burst into the cold New York night. She ran until her lungs burned, until the flickering neon lights of the city blurred into a haze of tears. She had exposed herself. She had broken the first rule of survival. Stay invisible. As she reached the mouth of the dark alley leading to her cramped apartment, a black sedan pulled up silently, cutting off her path. The door opened. Logan North stepped out. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have guards. He just stood there in his charcoal suit, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "You're a long way from the kitchen, Caitlin," he said. He didn't sound angry. He sounded haunted. "My father is back at the restaurant demanding to know how a waitress knows more about 18th century Sicilian law than a team of Harvard lawyers." "I'm nobody," she choked out, backing away. I made a mistake. Please just leave me alone." Logan took a step forward, his movements slow, deliberate. "I looked into the eyes of nobody once before. When I was a boy, my father took me to a gala hosted by Antonio Valenti. He had a daughter. She had the same fire in her eyes, the same way of tilting her head when she was thinking. He stopped just inches from her, the scent of expensive sandalwood and rain clinging to him. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, hesitant. The Valentis were ruined. They vanished. People said the daughter died in the fallout of the bankruptcy." Caitlin felt a sob catch in her throat. The weight of 10 years of hiding, of sleeping on floors, of serving people who didn't know her name came crashing down. "She didn't die," Caitlin whispered, her voice breaking. "She just became very, very tired." Logan's expression softened into something raw and empathy that didn't belong on the face of a man known for his ruthlessness. He didn't grab her. He didn't threaten her. He simply reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her calloused, overworked knuckles. "The game is over, Caitlin Valenti," he said softly. "You saved my family tonight. Now let me save yours." If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments with those who believe that destiny can change everything one day. Subscribe, because when destiny shifts, everything changes. The North Estate wasn't a house. It was a sanctuary of cold glass and ancient stone, perched high above the Hudson River. As the iron gates hissed shut behind Logan's black sedan, Caitlin felt a phantom weight lift from her chest, replaced by a new, sharper kind of anxiety. For 10 years, safety had meant a double-locked door in a crumbling tenement. Here, safety looked like silent security guards and motion sensor lights that bathed the manicured gardens in a ghostly silver glow. "You're shivering," Logan said softly. He didn't wait for her to respond. He draped his heavy wool overcoat over her shoulders. The fabric was warm, smelling of cedarwood and the crisp night air, a stark contrast to the grease-stained polyester she had worn for a decade. I haven't been behind a gate like this since I was 13, Caitlin whispered, her voice catching as they stepped into the grand foyer. The interior was breathtaking, soaring ceilings and minimalist art that screamed of power. Yet there was an underlying loneliness to the vast space. Logan led her not to a cold guest wing, but to a private study warmed by a crackling fire. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid but didn't offer her one immediately. He simply watched her, his gaze intense but no longer predatory. "My father is staying at the city penthouse to manage the fallout with the board," Logan began, leaning against a mahogany desk. "Russo's lawyers are already scrambling. You didn't just save our company tonight, Caitlin. You humiliated a man who has spent 20 years thinking he'd erased every trace of your bloodline." Caitlin sank into a velvet armchair, her body finally acknowledging the bone-deep exhaustion she'd carried for years. "He didn't just erase a bloodline, Logan. He erased a person. My father wasn't just a businessman. He was an artist of mechanics. He believed technology should be a legacy, not a weapon. Russo took his patents, rebranded them, and then watched as my father's heart literally gave out from the stress of the lawsuits. She looked down at her hands, red, chapped, and trembling. I spent 10 years cleaning tables for the people who bought his stolen ideas. Every time I saw a North Russo logo on a billboard, it felt like a ghost was treading on my grave. Logan moved toward her, his shadow lengthening across the floor. He knelt in front of her chair, a gesture so humble it made her breath hitch. He didn't reach for her hand this time. He simply stayed within her orbit, offering his presence as an anchor. My father. He isn't a saint, Logan said, his voice dropping to a raw, honest register. He built this empire on grit and sometimes silence. I grew up watching him become a titan, but I also watched him lose his soul to the bottom line. When I saw you in that restaurant, correcting a man like Dante Russo with nothing but the truth of your heritage, I felt something I haven't felt in years. What? She asked, her green eyes searching his. Hope, Logan replied, and a profound sense of shame. We were going to sign that contract because we were greedy for the Valente legacy. We didn't care about the people behind the paper. But you stood there with nothing, and you were stronger than all of us. Over the next few days, the estate became a strange sort of cocoon. Logan didn't treat her like a witness or a tool. He treated her like a person returning from a long, dark war. He brought her books from his private collection, first editions of engineering journals her father had once prized. He sat with her during dinner, not talking about business, but asking about the lemon groves in Sicily she remembered. The way the light hit the Mediterranean at noon. One evening, they stood on the terrace. The wind whipping Caitlin's now loose auburn hair around her face. She was wearing a soft cashmere sweater Logan's assistant had procured, the first piece of clothing in years that didn't feel like a disguise. Why are you doing this, Logan? She asked, looking out at the dark river. You could have just given me a check and sent me to another state, protecting me from Russo. It's going to start a corporate war that will last years. Logan stepped closer, his hand finding the small of her back, a light protective touch. Because for the first time in my life, I'm not looking at a merger or an acquisition. I'm looking at someone who survived a storm I can't even imagine. My life has been a series of calculated moves, Caitlin. But when I look at you, I don't want to calculate. I want to build something that actually matters. He turned her to face him, his thumb tracing the faint dark circles under her eyes that were finally starting to fade. Russo didn't just steal your patents. He stole your right to exist. I want to give that back to you. Not because of your name, but because of the fire I saw in that kitchen. That girl didn't just know a dialect. She had the courage to speak it when she had everything to lose. Caitlin felt a tear slip down her cheek, not a tear of exhaustion, but of release. For 10 years she had been a ghost. But in Logan's eyes she saw a reflection of the woman she was meant to be. He's going to come for me, she whispered. Russo won't stop until I'm silenced. He knows that if I'm alive, his claim to the Valente patents is a lie. Logan's jaw tightened, a flash of the ruthless CEO returning to his features. Let him come. He thinks he's playing a game of chess against a tired old man. He doesn't realize he's playing against a man who has nothing left to lose, but the woman standing in front of him. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. It was a moment of profound vulnerability, two people born into empires of glass, finally finding something unbreakable in each other. We aren't just going to hide. Caitlin, Logan promised, his voice a low, vibrating vow. We're going to take it all back. Every patent, every brick, every piece of your father's soul that he tried to bury. We'll build a trap he'll never see coming. In the quiet of the estate, surrounded by the ghosts of their pasts, the alliance was forged. It wasn't just a plan for revenge. It was the beginning of a deep, aching love, a romance born not from convenience, but from the shared trauma of two souls who had finally found home in the middle of a corporate battlefield. Caitlin reached up, her fingers grazing the silk of his tie. Then teach me, she said, her voice reclaiming its strength. Teach me how to fight like a North, and I'll show you how a Valente finishes a war. The war didn't begin with a shout. It began with a series of cold, calculated whispers across the digital tickers of Wall Street. Dante Russo was no longer hiding his claws. Humiliated by a waitress and desperate to bury the Valenti ghost, he launched a scorched-earth hostile takeover of North Industries' primary tech subsidiaries. He wasn't just trying to win. He was trying to bleed the Norths dry to force them to hand over Caitlin. "He's buying up the debt of our suppliers," Logan said, his eyes bloodshot from 48 hours of staring at flickering monitors in the war room. "He's squeezing our liquidity. If he hits 51% in the subsidiary that holds our green energy patents, he can force an audit. He'll find you here, Caitlin. He'll use the court to tie you up in identity verification lawsuits for a decade while he liquidates the Valenti assets." Caitlin stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the rain lash against the glass. She wasn't the trembling girl from the kitchen anymore. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek, professional ponytail, and she wore a tailored navy suit that felt like armor. "He thinks he knows the Valenti patents because he stole the final versions," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous hum. "But he doesn't know the foundations." "My father was paranoid, Logan. He grew up in a world where everyone was a predator. He didn't just write contracts. He wrote labyrinths." She walked over to the mahogany table, spreading out a series of weathered, yellowed blueprints she had retrieved from a hidden safety deposit box, the only thing she had saved from her childhood home. "Look at the 2006 infrastructure filing," she pointed to a complex diagram. "Russo thinks he owns the Valenti core, but my father filed a secondary, dormant patent for the environmental cooling subsystem under a shell company called L'Ombra the Shadow. It's written in that same archaic Sicilian legal code I used at the restaurant." Logan leaned in, his shoulder brushing hers. The heat from his body was the only thing keeping her grounded. "And if we activate that dormant patent, then every piece of tech Russo has sold for the last 10 years, every smartphone, every server, every satellite is technically infringing on a patent he doesn't own," Caitlin explained, a cold, brilliant smile touching her lips. "It's not just a lawsuit. It's an immediate global cease and desist." Desist. Global cease and desist. "We don't just stop his takeover. We bankrupt his entire empire in a single afternoon." Logan looked at her, his expression a mix of awe and something deeper, a fierce, protective pride. "You've had this the whole time? Why didn't you use it?" "Because I was alone," she whispered, her gaze meeting his. "To trigger L'Ombra, you need more than a patent. You need the legal firepower of a firm that can withstand Russo's counterattack. I had the key, Logan, but I didn't have the door. You're the door." For the next week, the estate became a frantic hive of activity. They worked side by side until the sun bled into the horizon. They ate takeout over piles of legal briefs and fell asleep on opposite ends of the sofa, draped in cashmere blankets. One night, as the clock struck 3 a.m., Caitlin found Logan staring at a photo of her father she had placed on the desk. "I used to think that being a CEO meant being the strongest predator in the jungle," Logan said, his voice thick with exhaustion and honesty. "But watching you work, watching you fight for a man who's been gone for 10 years, it's changed me. I don't want to just win anymore, Caitlin. I want to be worthy of the trust you've put in me." Caitlin walked over to him, her hand trembling slightly as she rested it on his arm. "You already are. You didn't just give me a place to hide, Logan. You gave me back my mind. You gave me a reason to stop being a ghost." Logan turned, his hands framing her face. The air between them was thick with the scent of old paper and the electricity of a shared mission. "When this is over, when Russo is gone and your name is restored, I don't want you to go back to being invisible. I want the world to see you exactly as I do." He kissed her then, a slow, desperate kiss that tasted of long nights and a shared, aching hope. It wasn't the polished romance of a billionaire. It was the raw, sincere connection of two people who had found each other in the wreckage of their own lives. But the moment was shattered by the buzzing of Logan's phone. "It's my father," Logan said, his face hardening as he read the message. "Russo just called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. He's claiming he has proof that the Waitress is a fraud and that I'm harboring a fugitive to manipulate the market. He's going for the kill, Caitlin." Caitlin took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. The fear was there, but it was buried under a decade of suppressed rage and a newfound love that felt like steel. Let him call the meeting, she said, her green eyes flashing with the fire of her ancestors. He thinks he's inviting you to your funeral. He doesn't realize he's invited the executioner. She picked up the Lombra file, her hand steady. We have the trap, Logan, we have the proof. Tomorrow I stop being Caitlin, the waitress. Tomorrow I become the nightmare Dante Russo has been trying to outrun for 20 years. Logan took her hand, his grip ironclad and certain. Then let's go finish this. Together. As they prepared for the dawn, the corporate world had no idea that the silent, exhausted girl from the diner was about to bring the entire skyline down on the man who had stolen her life. The billionaire and the heiress were no longer just allies. They were a storm, and the sky was already turning dark. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments with those who believe that destiny can change everything one day. Subscribe, because when destiny shifts, everything changes. The boardroom of Russo Global was a cathedral of glass and ego, situated on the 80th floor of a tower built on the bones of stolen dreams. Dante Russo sat at the head of the long obsidian table, flanked by lawyers who looked like vultures in expensive suits. Alfie and Logan North sat opposite him, their expressions unreadable masks of stone. Let's be civil, Alfie, Russo sneered, sliding a document across the table. The rumors of a volontaire are charming, but we both know she's a phantom. A clever waitress you picked up to stall this merger. I'm calling the vote. By the time the markets open, North Industries will be a subsidiary of Russo Global. The vote is premature, Dante, Logan said, his voice calm, echoing with a hidden edge. Because the rightful owner of the patents you're leveraging is finally here to cast her own ballot. The heavy oak doors at the end of the room swung open. The room went silent as Caitlin walked in. Gone was the slumped posture of the exhausted waitress. Gone were the wire-frame glasses and the faded apron. She wore a tailored suit of ivory silk, her auburn hair flowing like a river of fire over her shoulders. She walked with the grace of a woman who had been born to rule this room, her heels clicking against the marble with the rhythm of an approaching storm. Russo laughed, though the sound was brittle. The waitress? You've dressed her up well, Logan, but a costume doesn't make a queen. Caitlin didn't look at him. She placed a sleek black briefcase on the table and opened it, revealing the original hand-inked blueprints of the Lombra system. My name is Caitlin Valenti, she said. And for the first time in 10 years, the name didn't feel like a secret. It felt like a crown. And you are sitting in my father's chair, Dante. Security. Russo barked, his face turning a panicked shade of gray. Sit down, Dante, Alfie North growled, his eyes gleaming with predatory satisfaction. You'll want to hear this. It's a lesson in Sicilian law. Caitlin leaned over the table, her eyes locking onto Russo's. When you stole the Valenti core patents, you missed the shadow clauses. My father knew that one day a man like you would try to swallow his life's work. So he buried a forfeiture trigger in the foundational code. Every product you've sold using his tech, every contract you've signed in the last decade contained a virus of ownership. The moment I verified my biometric signature with the patent office this morning, the Lombra protocol activated. She slid a tablet toward the board members. Their eyes widened as they saw the live feed of Russo Global's stock. It wasn't just dropping. It was vanishing. The patents have reverted to the Valenti estate, Caitlin continued, her voice cold and crystalline. Which means you have no assets. You have no merger. You have nothing but 20 years of backdated licensing debt that you owe to me. By my calculation, Russo Global is bankrupt. You have 10 minutes to vacate the building before the federal marshals arrive to investigate your fraudulent filings. Russo collapsed into his chair, the air leaving his lungs in a ragged wheeze. He looked at the girl he had tried to erase and saw only the ghost of the man he had betrayed. The invisible girl had just dismantled his empire with a few words in a forgotten tongue. Logan stood, walking around the table to stand beside Caitlin. He didn't say a word. He simply placed his hand on the small of her back, a gesture of absolute solidarity. The game is over, Dante, Logan said quietly. You can leave through the front door, or you can stay and wait for the handcuffs. The choice is yours. One by one, the board members stood and walked out, leaving Russo alone in his glass cage. _. Underscore 2 weeks later, the chaos of the corporate war had settled into a triumphant peace. The headlines were dominated by the Valente resurrection, but Caitlin wasn't looking at the news. She was standing in the garden of the North Estate, the same place where she had once felt like a prisoner. Logan approached her, his tie loosened, the weight of the world seemingly lifted from his shoulders. "The paperwork is finalized," he said, stepping into her space. "The Valente North Foundation is officially registered. We're using the Russo liquidation funds to create a legal shield for small innovators, a place where people like your father can protect their dreams from predators." Caitlin turned to him. Her eyes bright with tears. "He would have loved that, Logan. Thank you." "Don't thank me," Logan said, his voice dropping to a thick, emotional whisper. He took both of her hands in his thumbs grazing the skin that was no longer chapped and red from dishwater. "Caitlin, for 10 years you survived by making yourself small. You thought you were nothing. But to me, you were the light that showed me how dark my own world had become." He dropped to one knee, the fierce CEO replaced by a man who was utterly, hopelessly in love. He pulled a ring from his pocket, not a cold diamond, but the gold signet ring of the Valente family, restored and polished until it shone like the sun. "I don't want to just be your partner in business," Logan said, his voice trembling slightly. "I want to be the man who makes sure you never have to hide again. I want to build a world where you are always seen, always loved, and always home." "Caitlin Valente, will you marry me?" Caitlin let out a choked laugh, the last of her trauma dissolving in the warmth of his gaze. She didn't hesitate. She threw her arms around his neck, pulling him up into a deep, soul-searing kiss. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. 1,000 times, yes. The sun set over the Hudson, casting a golden glow over the two of them. The heiress and the billionaire. The waitress and the king. They were no longer ghosts of the past. They were the architects of a new future, built on the ruins of a war they had won together. Caitlin Valente was no longer invisible. She was finally, truly free. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments with those who believe that destiny can change everything one day. Subscribe, because when destiny shifts, everything changes.